And what happens after our interviews is just as important as the interview itself. And as we move into the stage of analyzing our interviews, we need to always keep in mind at the back of our heads what the very main objective of doing interviews were in the first place. The purpose of our interviews are to explore the types of problems and challenges that our customer has, and whether to validate or not if those problems that we have are shared by other people. There's no magic number on how many interviews you should have, but once you have done about 10, you should be able to start seeing or noticing a similar pattern emerging in the problems that people might have. Once you do see that, you know that you're onto something and you're ready to start really analyzing these interviews. But if you're still finding that these people are saying very different things, you might be addressing a segment that's still a little too broad. So you might need to narrow your segment. So what you need to do is you have to come back to the drawing board, to the customer brainstorming workshop or worksheet. And then once you're there, you need to kind of think about all the different people that you've interviewed and draw a profile of probably one of those customers and get more specific. Think about their feelings, attitudes, and quirks, how they describe themselves, and then go and start another round of interviews. If you find that customers don't really care about the issue that you're interested in creating a business around, then you could do one or two things. You could find a new channel to find interviewees, so you're going back to the 50 ways worksheet, or you could find a new segment in itself. So instead of interviewing college grads, you're interviewing college attendees, and then you might be onto something. However, if you do go ahead and find that none of these segments really care much about your idea, then it might be the world telling you that they're not ready for your idea just yet. This obviously takes a bit of work, but just remember, we're not wasting any money or any business resources besides our own time. So there's absolutely nothing to lose here. And hitting a roadblock is never a loss. It's actually a clear win, because we've just discovered something that would have stymied our business later on, before putting in the years of blood, sweat, and tears of building something that ultimately doesn't sell. So if you have found interesting patterns with your customers or shared problems during these interviews, you would by now have heaps of notes to draw upon in the analysis phase. There are so many different types of ways to analyze these notes. There's not really a magic formula. But today what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you one method called affinity diagramming. Now, first, we need to put on our Sherlock hats. I've got mine, which is not really very close at all, but it's the only hat I have. Now that our hats are on, here are 5 steps to organizing and then analyzing our notes to get some real insights from our customers. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so the first step when we're analyzing our interviews is really to sift through our own notes from our first interview and to highlight all the nuggets in that interview. You might hear me say the word nugget and be, surprised. You might even think I'm joking. I'm not joking. A nugget is any piece of information that sticks out to you and gives an insight into what the customer is interested in or struggles with. You might want to be looking for a nugget in the problems or the phrases that they use, or the jargon, the emotions, the fears, the frustrations, the references to where they're finding current solutions, the aspects of their current solutions that are not really working at the moment. All those things are nuggets. So for me, I've got my interview in a Word document. I've interviewed this lovely lady called Jackie at a Mexican food festival last year. She was waiting in line to meet Ricardo Lemus, who was a Mexican chef, and she had some really interesting things to say. Just gonna show you what I consider a nugget. Some quotes that she made, I consider a nugget. There are no real Mexican Mexican joints near me. Thought that was very interesting. She considers herself an expert in Mexican. She definitely has become Mexican, is what she said, is that she adopted the culture and the values. Last time she had Mexican food was back in January, and she said it didn't taste like Mexican. She said, I look for generosity and a homey vibe, which I find very interesting. And other things like it's not fresh enough. Found that very interesting. The shells tasted or generic and not handmade. Things were too loud. So you can do a lot of this. I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and I'm going to show you what the final product looks like in a moment. So now that I have finished my highlighting of all my nuggets, you'll notice that my interview will look very yellow. And that's because a lot of the things that I wrote down were actually nuggets, and a lot of the things that I didn't write down were not as important pieces of information. So the more notes you write, the easier this process will be. Now let's head to step 2. So step 2 is that once we have highlighted all our interview notes and we found all our nuggets, it's basically to transfer those nuggets onto post-it notes, which of course I am doing online, but you can feel free to do it physically. If you want to do it online, you can just make a free account in Padlet.com, and all you need to do is simply write each nugget onto a separate post-it. Once you've done that, you start to group your post-it notes around similar ideas or themes that you have personally seen play out in the interview. For example, I noticed a lot of talk about fakeness and authenticity in the interview. So I'm going to kind of organize my post-its around real Mexican and the fakeness and perhaps the genericness of the taco shells. Perhaps price was one, so I grouped price and quality down here. In terms of what people look for, I put them over in a group, and I did see a Guzman and Sombrero kind of solution-seeking behavior there. So we continue to do this until all the themes have been grouped together. Step 3 now is just to basically repeat steps 1 and 2, but with your second, third, and then the rest of your interviews. And for each interview, it might be helpful to use a different color post-it note, so you can keep track of how many different people say or speak into a similar theme. So, for example, I have another interviewee who's talked about homemade shells again, and they said that they literally make or break the restaurant. So I would drag this over to this theme over here about realness and authenticity, and just make it a new color, and all my new or interview 2 notes would be now purple. Now keep in mind that as you add more interviews, your similar groupings or your themes that you group or your post-it notes by might morph and change, and that's totally normal. It's actually the reason why we're using post-it notes to begin with. At the end of step 3, your wall of post-it notes is going to get bigger, and it's going to start looking like a crime scene. It's going to look pretty mental. In this step, you really want to be able to remove or rearrange the ideas and themes that were only mentioned once, so or by like less than 2 customers or interviewees. So over here you can see that people, there was only kind of one idea here, and it was reiterated by one other customer or one other interviewee. So what I could do is I could delete all of that, or I could kind of see where it would fit into other locations. So these guys loved using corn flour or their own corn flour to make their tortillas. So maybe I could take that over to this part of the board. And then all these ones, this kind of goes back into authenticity. This one, I think I'll delete because there's nothing else on my board that reminds or picks up a similar theme. So I can get rid of that one. I go ahead and do that process until I've kind of cleaned up, I guess, all my ideas and themes. We're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major themes, and we've got authenticity over here. We've got making stuff from home here. We've got what we've seen in other places. We've seen generosity in a theme down here. Feedback down here, which I found really interesting. and then spices and fresh herbs in this one, in this theme here. So now in step 5, once we've done all this, is to basically sort all of these themes or groups by popularity. So we want to rearrange the groups so that the ideas mentioned the most or by the most interviewees come first, and then so on to the end. We'll have a few different clouds of post-it notes that quickly and clearly show then your customers' biggest problems, their strongest emotions, and ways that they address their problems at the moment. So we've finished step 5, and that is the final step. We have sorted all of our groups by popularity and by diversity of voices from the left side of the screen all the way to the right. So there's no one real way to do that, but I've just found that this is working for me, going from left to right. Now, this is the voice of your early adopters. They have told you what they need, what their problems are, and where they go to find their solution currently. And as we build our food idea or our business, we must be keeping all of these voices at the top of our mind, always. These might even form the basis of your unique value proposition, essentially what makes you different from your competitors. If you already have a product or business, I really do hope that by doing this exercise and the practice of interviewing customers gives you a much greater sense of understanding of who your customers even are, where they are, what their problems are, and what they do at the moment. Now, let's get on to our solutions and our testing in our next video. I will see you soon.